Vidita, please start.
I hope, sir, I am audible to everyone.
Yes, ma'am, you are. Please go ahead.
The time has come to draw a curtain to our program as we come to the close of it. A very warm good evening to one and all present here. I, Vidita Rakhe, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Law, Jagran Lake City University, welcome you all to this valedictory ceremony of the 2 days National E-Seminar on Effects of Climate Change, organized by JLU Center for Environmental Law and Climate Change, Faculty of Law, along with Center for Environmental Law, Education, Research and Advocacy, CEERA, National Law School of India University, Bengaluru. The virtual dais today is graced by the presence of Professor Dr. Sandeep Shastri, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Jagran Lake City University, Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhyal, Director and Dean, Faculty of Law, Nirma University, Dr. Sairam Bhatt, Professor, National Law School of India University and Coordinator of Center for Environmental Law, Education, Research and Advocacy, CEERA, and Professor Dr. Yogin Kumar Srivastav, Dean, Faculty of Law and Dean Student Welfare, Jagran Lake City University. William Shakespeare once said, and I quote, "Small cheer and great welcome makes a merry feast." So without a further ado, I would now like to request Dr. Shobha Bharadwaj, Associate Professor, Faculty of Law, to kindly deliver the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Vidita. I hope I'm audible. So good evening to one and all present here. Namaskar. 25 years ago, people could be excused for not knowing much or doing much about climate change. Today, we have no excuse. Sooner or later, we will have to recognize that the earth has rights too, to live without pollution. What mankind must know is that human beings cannot live without Mother Earth, but the planet can live without humans. With these words, I, Dr. Shobha Bharadwaj, Associate Professor, on behalf of JLU School of Law, Jagran Lake City University, extend a very warm welcome to everyone present here in the valedictory session of the 2 days National E-Seminar on Effects of Climate Change in the Contemporary World. It gives me a great pleasure to extend a hearty welcome to the dignitaries present. Our chief guest, Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhyal, Director and Dean, Faculty of Law, Nirma University. Our guest of honor, Professor Dr. Sairam Bhatt, Professor NLSIU Bengaluru and Coordinator CEERA. Professor Dr. Sandeep Shastri, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Jagran Lake City University. Professor Dr. Vivek Khare, Registrar, Jagran Lake City University, and Professor Dr. Yogin Srivastav, Dean Faculty of Law and Dean Student Welfare, JLU. I also extend the welcome to all the participants, attendees, faculty members, and their students. We wish to organize this event offline, but unfortunately, we did not have a chance to host you physically at the university and would love to do the same when we are through these testing times. Nonetheless, it is because of your presence and cooperation that we were able to conduct this event online successfully. Climate change is and will be affecting us all. It is literally a matter of life and no life. With the conduction of this seminar, we hope to raise more awareness and contribute to actions that would help fight it. We are glad to have you all here. Once again, a very hearty welcome to all of you. Over to you, Vidita. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those welcoming words. Now, I would like to introduce our very accomplished Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Sandeep Shastri, sir. Dr. Shastri has more than 4
just 2 sentences, Vidita.
So then, as I said, it is very difficult
just
for
2
me
sentences, please.
To introduce you in 2 difficult sentences. So I would request you to kindly take over the session from here, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. It's indeed a pleasure to welcome everybody to this concluding session. This has been one of the very important conferences that the university has organized in recent months. And I think it's a very happy augury that this second day of the conference is happening on the day that the Environment Day is actually observed. I had the privilege to be part of the inaugural program yesterday, was part of the panel we just now had, and now I'm at the valedictory. And when I looked at the intellectual dialogue which happened at all the sessions, I think that this conference has provided its participants a lot of new ideas, a lot of food for thought. As Dr. Ramesh said in the inaugural, I don't think we face a challenge of not knowing what to do. We face a challenge of the will of being able to do what we should do. And I think this conference has brought that particular point to the focus. As I said at my brief intervention at the panel discussion, if we look at the ancient Indian tradition, I think respecting nature, respecting the Panchabhutas, respecting the 5 elements of nature, so that there is harmony, happiness, and human oneness, has been somewhere ingrained in the way the Indian value system had sought to deal with life. It was Mahatma Gandhi who years ago said, we have enough for everyone's need, but we definitely do not have enough for everyone's greed. And I think all this brings us back to the central point we have been discussing yesterday and today, as to how do we address the questions of climate change, how do we prepare ourselves as a society for what climate change has been leading to, and how do we arrest that process. And while welcoming our very distinguished guests to the valedictory program, I would only make an appeal to all those who are participants in this workshop that dealing with climate change or keeping the world safe for the next generation, which is an obligation on all of us, requires not just the efforts of those in power and those in authority, but it requires concerted effort of governments the world over, of communities the world over, and the citizens the world over to be able to deal with and face the challenges we face with regard to climate. And I'm convinced that this conference has raised the awareness on that, and I do hope that as a university and as a law school, we have contributed our might on the Environment Day for building awareness on this very, very critical and very, very important issue. I welcome everybody on behalf of Jagran Lake City University to this function. I would thank our collaborators for having partnered us in this program. And I warmly thank our guests for having joined us at this valedictory session. I'm sure our seminar participants have found these 2 days usefully spent. And we at Jagran Lake City University and at the Law School of the university look forward to a long partnership with everybody in this wonderful journey of learning and contributing to social change and societal development. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, sir, for those words of wisdom. Moving ahead, I take this opportunity to introduce to you all the guest of honor of today's session, Professor Dr. Sairam Bhatt. Professor Bhatt pursued LLM and PhD from Department of Law, University of Mysore. He was awarded the Young India Environmental Law Fellowship and served as an adjunct faculty at Golden Gate University, California, USA during the fall 2003. He is a Fulbright Nehru Fellow 2010. He has held various positions like visiting researcher at Georgetown University Law Center, Washington, D.C., Linus Palme Academic Exchange Fellow at Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm. He was the editor of Care Law Journal in 2005 and 2006. His publication includes Environmental Law for Law Practitioners, CEERA, NLSIU 2002, Law Relating to Business Contracts in India, SAGE India 2009, Natural Resources Conservation Law, SAGE Law 2010, and Right to Information, Eastern Book House 2012. He started the NLSIU book series under which he has published books titled Contract, Agreements and Public Policy, Energy Law and Policy in India, Right to Information and Good Governance. He is also the chief editor of the Journal on Environmental Law, Policy and Development and Journal of Law and Public Policy published by NLSIU. He is also the chief editor of In Law magazine and the March of Environmental Law published by NLSIU. His area of interest are environmental law, law of contract, public-private partnership model, energy law, and right to information. Sir, without a further ado, I request you to kindly address the gathering.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Respected Professor Sandeep Shastriji, Yogendraji, the faculty colleagues at Jagran. It's been our privilege to collaborate with Jagran Lake City University, in particular with Professor Yogendraji, who is not only a close friend, but a great partner in the field of legal education, and somebody with whom we have always ventured out on different areas and topics. And I think this collaboration will definitely continue. So it's great to join the valedictory of this session with my senior colleague, Professor Ramesh, joining the inaugural session of this two-day wonderful workshop that has been organized. Friends, I'm sure in the last 2 days, I'm really sorry. I must acknowledge my humble respect to Professor Purvi as well, who is going to speak after me. Ma'am, good evening, namaskar, and respectful regards to you as well. Friends, in the last 2 days, I'm sure there has been an infodemic of information on climate change. Like we say, infodemic in terms of pandemic. So there has been quite a lot of information that has been shared with you. So what is new and different that I can bring to the table? Let me try and do some effort on that part. And hence, friends, I have certain propositions before you for consideration. And I will list it 1, 2, and 3. And I hope we can consider these propositions. We may debate, we may disagree, we can argue, and probably, we can probably say that this is the way forward or this is not the way forward. So this is some kind of, I must say, my ideas that I'm going to present before you, and I hope you can appreciate it. But if you disagree, that's most welcome. No problem regarding the same. So first and the foremost, friends, we are talking of climate change today in the last 1 year when we have faced COVID-19, right? Can I start by asking you whether COVID-19 is a result of climate change? You must be wondering, my goodness, what kind of interrelation is this professor speaking about? Why I'm speaking about COVID-19 is because we are so focused on bats and the kind of infection that we have received from the bat to the human population that we are saying COVID-19, COVID-19. But do you remember H1N1 by any chance? Different number. Do we remember H1N1? Have you forgotten about it? Do we remember swine flu? Do we remember anything like bird flu? Or have you forgotten? We are so much obsessed with COVID-19 that we have forgotten other tracks of human-animal diseases, the interlink between these two. And let me remind all of you that the issue on climate change is very relevant because in December 2020, that is just 6 months back, the United Nations Secretary General declared a climate emergency. He made a very important announcement and he said that we are in a climate emergency, right? But in May 2020, it was another organ of the United Nations, that is the World Health Organization, that declared COVID-19 as a public health emergency. So in 1 year, we had 2 international emergencies that were declared by UN organizations, a public health emergency and a climate emergency. Now, I don't know whether scientists will actually support my proposition of saying whether COVID-19 is a result of climate change. Friends, don't forget, climate change has huge impact on the way human and animal health are integrated in our society. And hence, I think it is for the scientists to tell us whether there is an interlink between these two. However, I think in our seminar, in the last 2 days, I think our emphasis should be on law and policy. Yes, the problems and the challenges of climate change are probably never ending. We may probably have an endless discussion about what has impacted on climate change, how it's going to affect, and so on and so forth. As a lawyer, let me try and lay down the focus on law and policy, right? Let me go to the second proposition. And the second proposition is, friends, in India, do we have enough regulations in place to combat climate change? For example, I'm going to start off by asking you whether the Environmental Protection Act 1986 is adequate enough to deal with climate change. Is the National Green Tribunal Act enough to address climate change? On this proposition, again, let me remind you, friends, while Environmental Protection Act is an umbrella legislation, it has contributed significantly to many notifications and legislations that deal with environment. It squarely falls apart when it deals with the effects of climate change. We probably do not see the adequacy of the legislation in dealing with climate change. And probably there is nothing effective to deal with the same. Though the Ministry of Environment is not Ministry of Environment and Forestry, it's not MOEF. Now we have said MOEF and CC, it's the same ministry, but I think legislative-wise, we have not adequately covered the issues that arise from climate change. And hence, if the legislation is not adequate, one should ask ourselves that is it time to bring in a law on climate change? Friends, to be honest, there are countries in the world that have started bringing legislations on climate change. I'm sure in the last 2 days, students and researchers would have told you that countries like Germany, New Zealand have already enacted a law on climate change and have given a target of zero carbon by 2050, which is one of those commitments under the Paris Agreements. Now, in India, to be honest, friends, as of now, we have some national action plan on climate change. We have certain action plans, we have schemes, certain states have certain policies on climate change, but we do not have a law or a legislative mandate regarding the same. So some of you may ask me, sir, policy to hai, law ka kya karna hai? Friends, you will notice that policy is definitely a non-binding instrument. It's more a visionary document. It is not going to give you a justiciable right in a court of law. Policies are subject to so many ifs and buts for its implementation. Whereas a law is something that is binding, it makes it mandatory for the states to implement. And hence, one would ask, what should such a law be? And is there a need for such a law? I feel, friends, to be honest, let's look at climate change today in the context of the last 2 weeks. I'm sure some of you, you're in the central part of India, Bhopal, but you're not probably on the eastern coast or the western coast. Please ask people in the western coast and the eastern coast who have actually experienced 2 cyclones in a matter of just 2 weeks. 2 cyclones in the matter of just 2 weeks. Now, if I talk to the coastal communities of Western India and Eastern India, these are the people who are experiencing the effect of climate change firsthand. Cyclones are not new. They were there probably even before we started debating, discussing, discovering climate change. But I think the veracity of these cyclones, the frequency of these cyclones has probably increased due to climate change, is what some scientists will tell you. Now, the point is, friends, we know that climate change probably is a reality. I think we all accept it. We are not like, the former president of the United States who probably did not accept it. We all think, yes, it is going to happen. It's a reality. We are facing it because India is one of those vulnerable nations that could be adversely affected by climate change, according to a lot of international studies. Having said this, friends, the point is, what is climate change doing? Yes, climate change is changing the weather, it is raising the sea level, it is increasing temperature, the ozone layer is depleting, it may affect your food security system, it is affecting animal and human health, we may have radiation, so on and so forth. All that is true, friends. But do not forget the fact that climate change is affecting people directly. How is it affecting people directly? Because it is resulting in disasters. Interestingly, friends, let us look at the adequacy of the law. When two cyclones came to the eastern and the western part of India, we actually used the Disaster Management Act. That is probably the only law that is put in operation, which is rightly so. And the Disaster Management Authority is there to evacuate people, to rehabilitate them. Please read Section 12 of the Disaster Management Act, which gives the mandate to the government to save lives. No doubt about it. I think that's a good law. But is the disaster management law the climate protection law? Does it actually protect vulnerable communities and people from the vagaries of climate change? According to me, friends, the Disaster Management Act is more on anticipation, preparation, and planning to disaster. It does not give citizens a right to climate protection. And hence, friends, to be honest, I believe that we do not want a climate change law, we want a climate protection law. What should a climate protection law look like? I think it should give communities the right to seek compensation. Today, compensation in climate, in disaster is all ex gratia. It is left to the discretion of the government to decide what kind of compensation to give, what is the rehabilitation to be done. But I think in a country like India, where poverty, unfortunately, is something that is a crisis. There are communities that are so poor, that are so vulnerable that they cannot access justice. I think the law must come up with an adequate protection mechanism to these kinds of communities. I'm not talking of only monetary compensation, friends. I'm also talking of those kinds of measures of protection in place so that these communities, one, do not lose life, do not lose property, do not lose crop, and most importantly, do not lose their livelihood due to the changes in the climate. Is it important for us to focus on climate protection, and is it time to bring in such a law in India? As of now, friends, I believe it is. Because even if I look at the NGT Act, where compensation for death can be granted, it is not due to climate change that such kind of compensation can be granted by the NGT, the National Green Tribunal. So the inadequacies of the law are very visible, friends, and hence that kind of vacuum in the law, that loophole in the law needs to be fixed sooner or later. And hence there is a call for legislating something on climate change in India, and it should be a law that encompasses the different aspects of climate change, including mitigation and adaptation. Let me come to my third proposition, friends. What is the third proposition? Friends, to be honest, let's look at India's commitment under the Paris Agreement, which is an international commitment. Yes, we are investing in the renewable sector. We are investing in the solar sector. The wind energy is something that we are investing. We are trying to reduce our dependency on coal. All of these commitments are very well done and established by India in line with the Paris Agreement. No doubt about it. But do not forget, friends, despite our international commitments, we have not done things in few areas. Please note it. First, I hope you know about automobile pollution. Most of us are concerned. Bhopal, maybe close to Delhi, Delhi's air is a problem. We have gone from use of diesel to CNG. From CNG, we are now looking at electric mobility. Great. I think electric mobility is the way forward, and that's the policy that the state must pursue. However, how much of attention law has put on the fuel used by ships? What are we looking at the shipping industry and their contribution to the carbon emission? Because they are not on land, they go on the sea, probably they're on high sea, not within territorial waters. What is the law? What is the policy on use of cleaner fuel by the shipping industry? Friends, to be honest, if you look at the International Maritime Organization, that is IMO only of late in the last 2 years, it is a 2018 guideline that was issued by the IMO. They are now trying to emphasize on cleaner fuel for the ships because that is also one great emitter of carbon. India has a long way to progress in trying to look at shipping industry using cleaner fuel, reducing their carbon footprint and joining the fight on climate change. The second sector, friends, that again, probably a sector that needs more work to be done is the aviation fuel sector. Do not forget, friends, it's not about we traveling in our four-wheelers or in our SUVs. It is also we traveling in our aeroplanes. Now, you will notice that SpiceJet did come up with the use of biofuel. We know the Prime Minister of this country today also announced ethanol blend that will be done in fuel. There is a lot of work that still needs to be done in the fuel sector, which can definitely join the hands in the fight against climate change. And hence, there is a lot of work that India ought to do. Now, this is where the ought proposition in climate change is. And we have to work towards developing the policy in this particular sector. And I believe that law and policy should champion these causes. The fourth proposition, friends. Interestingly, friends, we always look at the state and the government to fight climate change. I believe that's not sufficient at all. It is important that non-state actors or the private sector also joins the government in the fight against climate change. And in this regard, I think 2 weeks back, if some of you in your research have looked into, SEBI has come up with a circular. The Security Exchange Board of India has come up with an interesting circular which asks more than 1,000 companies in India to come up with what is known as the sustainability plan. I believe that the non-state actors have a very critical role to play in the fight against climate change, and it should be a public-private partnership. We must insist on industries to lower their carbon footprint year-on-year basis. And that is the only way in which you can achieve your targets of carbon emissions. And you know that a couple of days back, we had the Dutch court asking Shell to reduce its carbon emission by 45%. This is probably the very landmark decision. It's a great win for climate justice fighters and in climate litigation. So even non-state actors have a role to play, and in case they do not join, I think the climate change fight is not going to achieve the purpose behind what we intend to do. The fifth proposition that I have before you, friends, is on the biodiversity law. Biodiversity law is also one law that we include in environmental law. Interestingly, friends, when I look at biodiversity law, I'm just looking at the problems and challenges of climate change. What is climate change doing to biodiversity? Is it threatening certain species? Is it resulting in certain species being endangered or extinct? The answer is yes, it is resulting in the same. Only the human race probably may survive, but all other probably species may be threatened due to climate change. Now, the point that I'm asking is how much of the biodiversity law is implemented for conservation of these threatened species? How much of the biodiversity law is being invested to protect these threatened species? How important is it for the state and the society to use the biodiversity law to see that these kinds of species continue on any given in situ territories? I think, again, over there, when I view the biodiversity law, which is a good legislation, it's a great legislation, but in terms of conservation and protection of species, the biodiversity law also falls short. And I think that is, again, an area that needs to be plugged when we talk and discuss about climate change. Friends, let me just talk to you about, one last thing. And the last thing that I would want to emphasize is my proposition, the final proposition that I want to place before you. Friends, the reality of climate change is important for us to appreciate and understand. To anticipate what climate change will do is also very relevant and important. So the science, the technology on climate change, looking at greener technology, trying to reduce our carbon footprint, trying to probably visualize a cultural change so that we can fight climate change are all critical and important. There is absolutely no doubt about all of that. But the point that I just want to emphasize is, again, on this fact that today, when I look at, when I look at public health, right? Public health is now a kind of a federal issue. It's a federal issue in the sense that we are talking of who should procure vaccines. Just take this very interesting nature. States are saying we'll procure the vaccine. Center is saying we'll procure the vaccine. The issues of federalism in public health have already come to highlight. Why? Because public health is in the state list in the Constitution of India. We know that infectious diseases can be fought under the Epidemic Act, which is an 1897 British legislation. We know the country is struggling. We brought in an ordinance under the Epidemic Act to protect the frontline workers. We know that the Disaster Management Act is also used in the pandemic. Look at it, right? Disaster Management Act for cyclone, Disaster Management Act for public health. But I don't know whether that is good enough or not. But when you look at the last 1 year, friends, where we have all been locked inside our house and the animals are freely, enjoying the environment and nature, you tend to ask this one question. And this is the question that I want to ask all my friends. Friends, is it time to bring in a constitutional change? What kind of constitutional change? Friends, look at it from this angle. If you look at the Constitution, we have what is known as financial emergency. There was an interesting article written by an economist who said that during the pandemic, the Reserve Bank of India must print notes. We must pump money into the economy. But that may require a financial emergency to be imposed. I don't know. I'm not sure. But financial emergency is there in the Constitution. The second kind of emergency that we have is presidential rule that is put in states when there is failure of constitutional machinery. You can't say it's an emergency, but that's how president rule is imposed in the Constitution. The third kind of emergency, students, friends, what is that in the Constitution? It's in case of armed or the kind of external aggression that is there in the Constitution. Friends, my discussion with some of my constitutional law teachers has been on this part, that is it time that the Constitution is amended to include public health and climate emergency? Do we have to have a constitutional change in anticipating the future challenges that this country can face? What does a change in the Constitution do? Probably it gives emergency power to the government of the day to deal with that kind of public health and climate urgencies or exigencies. Today, I find certain states floating tenders. Floating tenders for vaccine may take 2 months' time, 3 months' time, lowest bidder. I don't know how many are there in the market. So should we follow the normal process in such urgencies and emergencies, or can we use exceptional powers in urgencies and emergencies? And don't forget, climate is going to bring in those urgencies and emergencies. In India, we may suffer those in the near future. Are we constitutionally and legally adequately prepared to deal with the same? And should we have a foresight to deal with the same? I would want you all to think about some of these propositions that I have before you. And the last one was probably something on the fundamental law of the land, to test whether the Constitution has to respond to the public health and climate emergency in the future. The Constitution has been amended numerous times. It need not be tampered. Everything need not be done through the Constitution. We can do it through a statutory legislation. I completely know and accept the same. But somehow I believe that a constitutional change will also iron out certain issues of the federal structure that we exist in this country between the center and the state powers as we go by. Some of my thoughts on the topic and some of my ideas is what I have shared with you today evening. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for those pragmatic words. It's always a pleasure listening to you. Moving ahead, it is indeed my sheer privilege to introduce the chief guest for today's session, Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhyal, Director and Dean, Faculty of Law, Nirma University. Ma'am has been the founding faculty of Institute of Law, Nirma University. She specializes in the area of criminal justice studies and justice education. Professor Pokhyal holds a master degree in law with specialization in criminal law and a doctoral degree in constitutional law from Maharaja Sayaji Rao University, Vadodara. She has been a consultant and a resource person on various aspects of legal studies for government as well as non-governmental organizations. Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhyal was conferred with Senior Social Scientist Award by the Indian Society of Criminology for her significant contribution to the field of criminology. She was also selected for Best Law Professor Award by the Business School Affairs and Devang Mehta National Education Awards. Professor Pokhyal is a visiting faculty at HOF University, Germany, and she has been a resource person at various training programs, national and international conferences. Professor Pokhyal has been actively engaged in institution building and clinical legal education process. Her recent area of interest are higher education, artificial intelligence and law, and constitutional law. She has several research papers published to her credit and has presented more than 40 papers in various national and international conferences. Professor Dr. Pokhyal is an independent director at Nirma Limited and the Kalapuru Commercial and Cooperative Bank Limited. She has been a member of Board of Governance at Nirma University. Ma'am, I request you to kindly enlighten the gathering by your kind words.
Thank you so much, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Sastriji, our dear friend, Professor Yogendra Srivastava, Professor Sairam Bhatt, a dear friend who has delivered a thought-provoking session, dear faculty colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed an honor for me to be here at the concluding ceremony of this two-day session on a very vital issue. And I'm sure that this 2 day must have witnessed thought-provoking sessions, thought-provoking ideas. And I'm sure that, when it comes to the climate change and climate resilience, we have to go a long way with reference to some of the implementations of some of the thoughts that might have been presented over here. So at the outset, my compliments to the organizers for organizing such a session on the International Environment Day. For this session today, I just would like to, speak on a very small idea that how do we develop climate resilience as a university in this Anthropocene world. So, how do we understand the Anthropocene world? We all live in this Anthropocene world and new geological era. So many of you might have come across this particular terminology, which is not as such officially recognized by the ecologists. But basically, when we talk about geological time scale, what we call is GTS, this GTS describes various time periods of geological history. And this geological history, classified various time period into a largest divisions that we are known as eons. And these eons are further classified into different eras, which are in turn classified into periods, epochs, and ages. So the current epoch that we all are living, it has been termed by many climate experts as an Anthropocene world. As I said, this is not officially being recognized by the ecologists, but it has been for the first time, it's been coined in the year 1980, the word Anthropocene, and then further popularized by the Nobel laureate, scientist called Paul Crutzen. Now, this Anthropocene, that the word comes from the Greek terminology called anthropo, that means man, and scene, that means new. So it's basically, it connects humans with changing geology. So it's not basically, it reinforces that it's not just the planets, the natural cycle change, but it also the greenhouse emissions induced by the human beings that causing this change. So basically, when we talk about Anthropocene, it talks about the evolving and changing relationship of human with environment. So, as we all know, and we must have discussed in these 2 days, that human activities had so profound impact on the planet Earth. And, and profoundly, that planet Earth has been impacted by various activities so far. And that is what we know as this new geological epoch, the Anthropocene world. Now, this human-driven change, when we talk about this human-induced change, human-driven change, they do not differentiate between the diverse social groups and regions. And this is how, that It's very interesting idea that how this geological forces that is emerging through the different human activity is much going ahead of the going much ahead of from the debate of the diversity and marginalized group, because it impacts everyone. So when we talk about the Anthropocene, there is a great debate that when basically this Anthropocene has started. Some of the scientists say that it is impossible to predict the exact date or time when this epoch has started. While some say that yes, basically we can predict, and that prediction, according to that prediction, somewhere around by the Industrial Revolution, so somewhere around by 1940, 1950, we can say that this Anthropocene has started, because this Industrial Revolution has basically brought the major human-induced changes on the planet Earth. But however, some others, they do have an opinion that the Anthropocene has started much before, thousands of years ago, when for the first time humans have started making some kind of a changes with reference to land, when they have introduced agricultural practices. And this is precisely, when you read Sapiens, by Yuval Nolan, you will come across this discussions on this. So basically, when we talk about this Anthropocene world and the Anthropocene era, we can say that though this Holocene, the period of human existence, maybe around 12,000 years has 12,000 years of its existence. This is immediately after the Ice Age. But the scientists expostulates that this Holocene has ended, and the anthropogenic climate change has severely affected the life on Earth for the last almost 200 years. So, we have a diversified views, we have difference of opinion, but at the end of the day, what is more important that, we live in on this planet Earth, and in this Anthropocene era, ecological era, wherein we are living with a lot of ecological forces, and we as a human being, we as an individual, we as a collective group of people have a lot to contribute in this ecological force, because and precisely in the last 60 years, particularly after this Industrial Revolution, these human impacts that has been really unfolded in an unprecedented rate and scale, because this is the period which is known as probably the great acceleration phase, the great acceleration period, wherein the carbon dioxide emission has increased, global warming, ozone acidification, habitat destructions, extinction, wide-scale natural resources extractions, and all are the signs that has through which this planet Earth is being significantly modified. So when we live in this Anthropocene world, how do we develop the climate resilience? Now, this is, and how do I contribute as an individual, as a group of the society, or as a university community, I would say, how do I communicate in the climate resilience network? So the first thing that I have read somewhere by an author called Deepesh Chakraborty from University of Chicago. In one of his paper, when he talked about the climate resilience framework, he talked about that we need to go, we need to march towards towards the zoocentric approach, the homocentric to zoocentric. When we talk about homocentric, it's more about bringing human centricity. When we talk about zoocentric, it's all about bringing life into the centricity in the whole discourse. So basically, we need to develop epochal consciousness versus developmental and departmental thinking. So this is how he tried to bring forth some of the ideas of climate resilience, that we need to think, and this year's theme also is all about, how do we restore the planet Earth through through reimagining, through recreation, through redefining some of our actions. And this is how, in this context, I just would like to talk about climate resilience, that how do we develop an adaptive capacity, especially by bringing socio-ecological governance. When we talk about climate change, we are largely dependent on the national government or the supra-government institutions like United Nations. We talk about various policies, frameworks, strategies. That's fine. But how do we develop the local level socio-ecological governance system? That governance system which can absorb stresses and maintain functions in the face of external stresses that has been imposed due to the climate change. How do we adapt and reorganize and evolve in more desirable configuration that improve the sustainability of the system? This is how we can think of the climate resilience framework. So when we talk about climate resilience framework, first of all, we need to address the climate vulnerability. So climate resilience efforts, as I said, encompasses social, economic, technological, and political strategies at global level, at national level, and at local level as well. And that's the reason that we need to have an actor-based approach versus system-based approach. So at a university level, at individual level, at community level, probably we need to work more towards the actor-based approach rather than changing the system at large. So this is how, I just would like to, ponder upon the issues of green morality. We have been talking a lot about using a plastic ban, using, not to have what we call packaged water. So do we name and shame those people who use the plastic bags? How do we develop the standards of green morality? How can we infuse the behavioral change, climate appropriate behavioral change? As an individual, we can bring this change in ourselves, in the family, in our community, in our university, in our students, in my faculty peer. How do we bring and induce this climate appropriate behavioral changes? In like simple example that, expecting, naming and shaming to everyone who do not have a solar panel on their rooftop. How do we bring this green morality standards in our daily affairs? So this is how do we decrease the consumerism? So there are so many things which we can do at our level, and especially when we talk about the initiative at a university level, I'm just wondering that why don't we introduce the sustainability projects, amongst our students, amongst our faculty colleagues at the university. When we talk about the NIRF ranking and Times ranking and all kinds of ranking, except the Times social impact ranking, none of the ranking agencies does give any kind of hit to the whole issues of the sustainability initiatives by the university or by the community of the students. So, as a university, there are some of the suggestions that I feel that we need to introduce as a part of the sustainability project by the students, with the help of the students, with the help of the faculties. And that could be, when it comes to the university campuses, it could be allowing only organic food. Now it becomes a little difficult, and it may create a lot of issues in availing the organic food. But how, with the sustained efforts, how do we promote the idea that in this campus only the organic food would be allowed, or would be sold, or would be distributed? How do we promote the renewable energy, whether all our campuses have a solar panel, whether all our campuses we have a terrace, we have all our campuses have a terrace. How do we develop, with the help of the students and faculty, the terrace gardens, the garden landscaping, with the help of the students and faculty? How do we develop a small forest in our campus and preserve the biodiversity? So recycling, clean water, there are some of the aspects that has been taken care in the NAC manual when it comes to the recycling and the waste management thing. But that is just not as a part of the compliance mechanism, but as a part of the what we call a socially vigilant community, as a part of the developing of the climate resilience framework and appropriate climate resilient appropriate behavior. How do we introduce this kind of a change in our institute and education institution administration and governance with the help of the faculty and students? And these are the few things, and apart from that, I mean, how do we promote vegan meal amongst our students, because that is also one of the very important aspects of the climate resilience framework. So clean water, low carbon transport, how do we promote the public transport system? How do we ban the vehicle on the campus and promote the bicycles? Just now Professor Sairam Bhatt also talked about this thing. These are, when I visited, and like so many of you also must have visited various universities in Germany and England, and especially in Maastricht and all, there have been an ongoing consistent sustainability drives by the students on the campus, and that really helps in a longer way. So my whole focus is on developing the socio-ecological governance at the local level, at the community level. We do have a lot of laws and plans and strategies and treaties, and we must have discussed all these things in this 2-day conference. But at the end of the day, what difference do I make as an individual? What difference do we make as a community? That also goes a longer way. So these are the few ideas which I thought we can share. That how do we promote climate resilient network and the framework with the help of the students, teachers in our university community in this Anthropocene world. So I thank the organizers for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those insightful words. We are highly indebted. Now, I would like to request Ms. Shrishti Yadav, co-convener, National E-Seminar and co-coordinator, Center for Environmental Law and Climate Change, to kindly present a report of this event. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So this 2-day National E-Seminar on Effects of Climate Change in Contemporary World was a 2-day online event conducted on 4th and 5th of June 2021. I'll be presenting a synthesized report of the event. So there were a total of 55 registrations and 36 successful paper presentations by professional academicians, research scholars, and students from across the country. I congratulate them all for their efforts and participation. There were in total 5 technical sessions, each of which was adjudged by a panel of 3 judges who were learned academicians and experts. One was chair and other 2 were chairs. On first day, the event commenced with inaugural session, which was graced by the presence of Professor Balraj Chauhan sir, Vice Chancellor, Dharmshastra National Law University, Jabalpur, as chief guest for the event, and Professor Dr. M. K. Ramesh sir, Professor NLSIU, Bengaluru, as guest of honor. We also had Professor Dr. Yogendra Kumar Srivastav sir, in Faculty of Law, Student Welfare, who delivered a very thought-provoking welcome address, and Professor Dr. Sandeep Shastri, Vice Chancellor, Jagran Lake City University, who brightened the spirit of all the attendees with a special address. The inaugural session was followed by 2 technical sessions on day 1. Day 2 of the event kick-started at 11:30 a.m. with 3 technical sessions. Post the technical session, a very thought-provoking panel discussion was held. It was very detailed discussion. It dealt with 360-degree view of topic of sudden climate change. It featured Dr. Nusrat Praveen ma'am, Dean, School of Law, Bennett University, discussing India's legal regime towards decarbonization. She also discussed on international and national regime. Ma'am also discussed about struggles between developed nation and developing nations on limit of carbon emissions. Then we had Professor Dr. Sandeep Shastri. He pointed out the topic of climate change and how it affects people's life. Sir discussed about the role of human race as a community and how we can make things better. So the address has really served as food for thought for attendees and participants. Then we had Professor Dr. Rajiv Khare, Dean PG Studies, NLIU Bhopal. He gave an address on topic of climate governance, international development, and India's initiative. He gave all the details of historical development of international regime of climate change, like UNFCCC, Kyoto Protocol, etc. Then we had Mr. Siddharth R. Gupta, Advocate, Supreme Court, and MP High Court. He discussed about the controversy around draft EIA notification. So, Sir enlightened us with his professional expertise on EIA notification. Following the panel discussion, and to conclude the event, we have valedictory session, which began by welcome address by Dr. Shobha Bharadwaj Ma'am, Associate Professor, JLU Faculty of Law. We are graced with the presence of Professor Dr. Sairam Bhatt Sir, Professor and Coordinator, CEERA, and National Law School of India University, Bengaluru, as guest of honor. Sir gave holistic view on existing regime on climate change across sectors and across geographies. Sir identified various stakeholders. Sir has discussed about national plan, policies, and various visionary directives which exist on climate change. But he emphasized on a need for legislation on climate protection. A legislation like this should compensate stakeholders, not just by compensating but compensating with their lives, property, and livelihood. Sir raised a very innovative question that whether constitutional law should include a public health and climate urgency in our provision as the need of hour. I'm sure our attendees would have got a lot of takeaway points from this lucid and interesting address. Then we have Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhyal Ma'am, Director and Dean, Faculty of Law, Nirma University, as a chief guest. Ma'am discussed about geographical timescales, relationship of human activities and environment. She discussed that it's high time we should all sit down and introspect at institutional and individual level that where we went wrong with the industrialization and its impact. So to conclude, concerns are real, threats are serious, but it's never too late. I will conclude this report with a Hindi poem of Dushyant Kumar saying that सिर्फ हंगामा खड़ा करना मेरा मकसद नहीं, मेरी कोशिश है कि सूरत बदलनी चाहिए, मेरे सीने में नहीं तेरे सीने में सही, हो कहीं भी आग लेकिन आग जलनी चाहिए. So we have lit the lamp. I hope attendees and participants will take it forward.
Thank you so much, Shrishti ma'am. Last but not the least, I would request Ms. Ongmula Bhutia, Convener, National E-Seminar and Coordinator, Center for Environmental Law and Climate Change, to propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Am I audible now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. A very good evening to one and all present here. Once a great man whispered, feeling thankfulness and not expressing it is like wrapping a present and not giving it. With these words, I, Ongmula Bhutia, on behalf of Faculty of Law, Jagran Lake City University, Bhopal, feel truly honored and privileged to put all my gratitude into words in this valedictory ceremony of the two-day National E-Seminar on the effects of climate change in the contemporary world. At the outset of this occasion, I express my deepest gratitude to our chief guest for the ceremony today, Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhyal, Director and Dean, Faculty of Law, Nirma University, who spared her precious time gracing the occasion. Ma'am, today we had the opportunity to hear your thoughts, and your words will truly encourage us in future as well. I express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Professor Sairam Bhatt Sir, our guest of honor. Sir, I am short of words on the context of expressing our appreciation and thankfulness for your endless support for most of our endeavors. Sir, I also take this opportunity to express my humble gratitude for accepting our request of collaboration to organize this two-day National E-Seminar. Your assistance in the collaboration was unceasing, and we truly and wholeheartedly acknowledge it. And also looking forward for more collaboration in future as well. I also express my sincere appreciation and gratitude to all the legal luminaries in different sessions for taking out time amidst of their busy schedule and sharing their knowledge and experience with us. On behalf of the Faculty of Law family, I would like to extend our deepest thanks and regards to Honorable Chancellor of Jagran Lake City University, Sri Hari Mohan Gupta ji, Honorable Pro-Chancellor, Sri Abhishek Mohan Gupta, and Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Dr. Sandeep Shastri, for their unending support and guidance. I'm equally thankful to our Registrar, Professor Dr. Vivek Khare sir, for all your encouragement and support. A special mention to our Dean, Professor Dr. Yogendra Srivastava. He, being the catalyst, inspired us to do our best and stood as a pillar of power. I will forever be grateful for your guidance, sir. I would also like to acknowledge all the participants. Your participation has made this e-seminar a successful event. I would like to believe that this e-seminar has given you an insight into the effects of climate change, and we hope that the fundamental purpose of engaging the participants in this e-seminar amounts to be fruitful. A special thanks to Parul ma'am, Sanjay sir, Kubesh sir and their team for their continuous support and tremendous contribution to make this seminar a successful one. At this point of time, how can I forget to thank all those dear faculty members who lent their helping hands for organizing this event. I appreciate and thank you all for your cooperation. A special mention to my dearest colleague, Dr. Apurva Dikshit and Ms. Shrishti Yadav. Both of them ceaselessly worked and provided assistance that was exceptional in its own way. I thank you both with all my heart. Next in line are my beloved student conveners, Mr. Anadi Nayak, Mr. Prajwal Dharwa, and Ms. Prati Buraria, who are the champions of this program. They are true pillars who stood strong and determined, supporting the whole devising of the program. I truly thank you all. I must not forget to thank to my student moderators of the technical session, Ms. Sukriti Singh, Ms. Shrishti Kherwar, Ms. Vidhi Panjwani, Ms. Vipasha Kamalwanti, and Ms. Faria Ali Khan for working hard for the last few days to make this seminar a successful one. In the midst of this, if by any chance, if I have forgotten to acknowledge anyone, kindly consider this as my ignorance and not any hard feeling against them. Once again, thank you so much everyone for contributing for the successful conduction of this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Lastly, I would request all the participants of this valedictory session to kindly turn on their camera for a group photograph.